Rachel.
Hi, Brittany.
So today I want to talk about the Bill of Rights. And we talk about the Bill of Rights a lot as being its own thing. I think sometimes for people who are just learning about the Constitution and everything, it's sometimes confusing because you have the Declaration, you have the Constitution, you have the Bill of Rights. But the Bill of Rights is part of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights, we have amendments. So every time you want to add something to the Constitution, there has to be a deliberation you have, in Congress, and there has to be a ratification process. And the Bill of Rights are the first 10 of those amendments that came pretty shortly thereafter the signing of the Constitution. But it was a big, it caused a ruckus, if you will. There was a lot of back and forth. And it's funny because nobody was against what was included in the Bill of Rights. They were against whether or not it needed to be included. And it's kind of funny because you had one side that was like, this is so obvious. Why would we need to put this in here? Clearly, people are going to look at this and be like, oh, of course that means free speech is protected. Like, who would be silly enough to ignore that? And what's funny about that is by the time we got to John Adams, he was already trying to pass infringement on free speech. And so it's like they were there and they still forgot. So that's why it's so important. So Bill of Rights, I'm going to see if I can do all these from memory. Number one, free speech. Yeah. Number two, right to bear arms. Number three, right to not quarter soldiers, which sounds weird, but there's good reason for that. We'll get into that later. Number four, privacy. Number five, privacy, but also the right to remain silent. There's some due process in there. 6 and 7 is where I get mixed up because 7 is jury trial, but there's also other things like double jeopardy. There's like some other things in it. Oh, I'm mad that I couldn't remember the 6th. I was like,
do I need to Google it?
Yeah, but you Google it, but I'm going to try to come back to it. Okay. 8 is cruel and unusual punishment. I like that one. It's not saying there can be cruel and unusual punishment. It's saying there cannot be. 9th?
No.
And 9th is, I think, a little bit of due process. I was I was going to quiz Rachel on this. It was funny. And then I was like, no, I'm going to quiz myself. I'm going to put myself on the spot here. I am a little bit at an unfair disadvantage, though, because I deal with the amendments in my outside life all the time. So
6 is right to a fair trial.
Okay. So 7 is jury trial. 6 is right to a fair trial. See, I was close.
And yeah, rights in civil cases.
Okay, what does it say for 9? What's the 9 breakdown?
Rights retained by the people.
So rights retained by the people. And then the 10th is an interesting one because the 10th, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I believe so. So there's some due process in both of them. The 10th made the entire thing, Constitution included, applicable to the states.
Mm-hmm. States' rights.
States' rights. So I did pretty good. Really only forgot the 6th.
You did very good. Yes.
But, so thank you, Rachel, for being my Google master over there.
No problem.
Here's the interesting thing. Well, first, let me ask you this, Rachel, then I'll get into a little bit of the background of it. What's your favorite amendment? Do you have one? I know they all kind of go together, but what's your favorite?
Oh, well, I'm a communicator. So the First Amendment, freedom of speech.
Same.
I think there's a really good reason why that's number one.
Yeah.
It's because all of the other rights really don't matter if you can't speak your mind and say who you are and speak out for change. The whole system is kind of underpinned by being able to convince others of the way you think the government ought to be. And if you can't speak, then you have no power. So First Amendment.
And it's not even just speaking. So, and I want to do, eventually we'll do an episode on each amendment. We did that in the past, but I want to do a refresher.
That's a good idea.
First Amendment, I don't want to give too much away, but it isn't just free speech. It's the freedom to associate. So let's say Rachel is part of a group that doesn't like the government or doesn't think conventionally. I'm allowed to associate with her. And that might seem like an obvious thing, but it wasn't always that way. Here's the other thing about the First Amendment. Again, I'm giving too many teasers that I always think is interesting too. So when you go to the store and you buy almond milk is technically not milk, right? Milk comes from animals, but you have a right as a business owner to call your product almond milk and not almond drink because of the First Amendment. And the FDA actually tried to press back on that and say, you can't call it milk. It's not milk. But there's a right to free speech that's involved in there. So protest. Yeah. So there's all sorts of things. Again, I don't want to give too much away. We'll do a whole First Amendment.
That came down to the First Amendment? That's
It is a First Amendment issue. Yeah. There's economic liberty involved in it too, which is actually like the 14th Amendment. I digress. But yes, it's actually, that is part of the First Amendment, and people forget about that a lot.
And the right to peaceably assemble.
And the right, so protest, right to peacefully assemble. So there's all sorts of cool things wrapped up in there. I agree with you. Mine is probably, my favorite is probably the first. That's why I just went on that tangent. The fourth is really, really important to me, and the fifth as well. So the third, I wanted to get into some background on that, because I think we think like quartering soldiers, like no soldier is trying to live in my house and eat my food during, wartime.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. And it's happened before. And think about this. It happened, and it was so impactful on the framers of the Constitution that they thought to add it to one of the 10 most important things they wanted to add. That's how you know it was pretty darn important, right? So it might sound weird to us now, but also there's that saying, what is past is prologue. Like what has happened before can happen again. And hopefully it doesn't, but we like that we have the safeguards in there, and that's why it exists today. But some background on the Bill of Rights. So you have during the Constitution, you have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And I think I've talked about this a million times on the audio only podcast, but you're going to hear me talk about it a million times again. My favorite thing about that era were the pamphlets. And there was this like pamphlet war. And I always compare it now to like social media back and forth on like Twitter or X, whatever it's called today. So the Feds, the anti-feds were they had anonymous publications. We know who they are now. The Federalist was Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. Oh my goodness. Why did I just draw a blank on my favorite thing? You know this.
Benjamin Franklin?
No, it wasn't Benjamin Franklin, Rachel.
He wasn't on the pamphlets?
No.
Samuel
No, not
Adams.
pamphlets in general. Sorry. The Federalist Papers. That was my fault for not specifying. Oh my goodness. This is killing me. I'll get back to it later because I'm going to remember. I'm like trying to quiz myself today because these are things I literally talk about all the time, and I can see his name and it's driving me nuts. Rachel, you're on Google duty while and it's going to bother me when you say it because I'm going to be like, oh, I knew. But
who wrote the Federalist Papers? Is that what we're looking at?
So the Federalists were very pro, like government still kind of, or the federal government having the central authority. The anti-feds wanted a less centralized big government. They wanted it to be the Articles of Confederation, which will be a whole other episode. But the Federalists were the ones who were like, we don't need to adopt this Bill of Rights because it's so common sense. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, that's already in there. They're going to obey that. And they had the good sense, they meaning everybody when it was ratified, had the good sense to say, government's not always great at obeying the laws, or common sense by obeying implied laws, being like, oh, well, yeah, if you have a right to property, that means you clearly have a right to free speech on that property. No, government will try to get away with anything it can possibly get away with. And so the Bill of Rights were luckily ratified into our Constitution, giving us some of our most sacred rights. Rachel, what'd you find out?
Alexander Hamilton.
Okay, I knew
Federalist
that one.
Papers.
I knew Hamilton. I knew Madison.
John Jay.
Okay, well, that's irritating because I
pseudonym
did know that.
Publius.
Publius, yes, that's which was like the people, the public. And the anti-feds, again, we'll do a whole episode on that too. People always talk about the Federalist Papers when they talk about the, exciting time of framing the Constitution. But the anti-feds don't get a lot of street cred, and they deserve it because, so basically you had the Federalists writing the Federalist Papers, and like every week a new one or a couple new ones would come out, and people would be like, oh, did you read the new Federalist paper? Oh, I can't believe he said that. And then you'd get the anti-feds would respond and be like, well, here's mine. And, oh, did you see the anti-fed? Did you see what he just posted on Twitter? Not Twitter, but you know what I mean.
Sick burn, bro.
Yeah, sick burn, bro. Whoa, he really said that? What? Trial by jury? Get out of here. It was like, this was the exciting,
and it's funny that a lot of our founding fathers were like in their 20s. So
Except for Ben Franklin, who it's so funny to me for as bad as I should say, as good as like there was no sanitation back then. People didn't know to clean things. There was soap wasn't commonplace. And yet Ben Franklin lived to be so old. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams also lived to be old. You're just kind of like, wow, because Ben Franklin, I feel, was always like 60.
Their immune systems must have been.
It would have had to have been
amazing.
But yeah, the Bill of Rights. I'm so glad that they made the right choice to adopt it into the Constitution, because laying those out, I think, just clearly says listen, the Constitution is this framework. Here are the things. Here's what the executive, judicial, legislative branch do, but also this is what government cannot touch. Now. There's a lot of wiggle room. Like I said, government will try to get away with anything. And so, yes, free speech written right there. But then the economic thing I told you about almond milk, these little fine-tuned things, they duke it out in the courts, basically. So you see how far you can push that speech. The government sees how far they can go to stop that speech or stop that expression. And then eventually it gets to the courts where they hear the arguments. That's where we get things like, okay, you have free speech, but you can't incite a riot. You can't yell fire in a theater. So, right. So you have these things where you're like, okay, but I have free speech. Then it goes to the courts, and then the courts are like, okay, but if someone could get hurt, blah, blah, blah. So even though they're written down, go on.
And if you're just absolutely lying about somebody in a public way that damages their livelihood, then that's actionable. You can't just, that's libel or slander or libel.
Spoken. Yeah. There's one of them, I believe libel is written, slander is spoken. So so there's all these things where it's think about it. They thought it was going to be so commonplace that it was why do we need to include these? They'll get it. We even have them written down, and there's still controversy over.
I also want to.
Oh, go on.
I think that's a really, really important amendment. I don't know that that's my favorite, but it's important because it just kind of points out, look, the enumeration of certain things, just because we didn't spell it out doesn't mean that you don't have that right. So
this isn't the definitive collection of rights.
Yeah, we might have forgotten something. That doesn't mean that this is an exhaustive list. So I think that's pretty important for them to have included that.
And we will go over, like I said, I know we kind of focused a lot on free speech just because Rachel and I like free speech, but we'll go through each of the amendments in a different episode because I think most of them require their own because there's so much historical context and so much good stuff in there. So it's not just the first, even though we love the first. So yeah, Bill of Rights, they're great. Check them out. See if you can quiz each other to see if you know them. I thought I was going to come in here 10 out of 10. Winning the whole thing. I got close. So
close, yeah.
We'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll talk to you later.
See you next time.